24 Pakistani troops. We're, of course, going to talk with Pepe Escobar about that in a few moments. In the past, we were only guarding ourselves or reacting against militants, said the source, who requested anonymity. We've given our posts some more space to respond. If they're under attack, they should not wait for orders. Just another bizarre twist in all the escalations in that large, important region of the world. Meanwhile, there's a covert war going on in Iran. Of course, this week there were reports of a blast in Isfahan, a non-enrichment and enrichment facility, but they do nuclear research there. All eyes on Israel after second Iran blast there, and it talks about how they didn't even try to play it down in the Israeli government that they may have been behind it. However, a Jerusalem Post article takes kind of a different twist here, talking about how it was extremely unlikely that a Western government perpetrated the attack. Of course, there's been many calls for war in Iran. The question is, how will they bring it about? A military analyst has said that it is, quote, extremely unlikely that a Western government perpetrated the attack. They go on to discuss in the article how no longer content to demand that Ahmadinejad step down and fair elections take place, the Green Movement began calling for and working towards the overthrow of the regime as a whole. Since last year, regime installations as well as key members of the Revolutionary Guards have been targeted on a regular basis. There's been a five-fold increase in the number of explosions at Iranian oil pipelines and refineries. So who's behind it? He goes on to discuss the attack 2 weeks ago on the Bidgana Air Force Base, and two other Revolutionary Guard bases were conducted by members of Iran's anti-regime Green Movement, one of those velvet revolutions backed by Western powers, including Soros. It targeted General Hassan Tahrani Moghadam. However, it goes on to explain how Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was scheduled to visit the Bidgana base at the time of the explosion, but was delayed. Then it goes on to explain how in May, the Abadan oil refinery was bombed during a site visit by Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. So they're not only disrupting facilities, but trying to carry out assassinations. And they go on to blast Obama in this saber-rattling thing. Thankfully, Obama's abandonment of the traditional U.S. role as leader of the free world has not prevented Western governments and regional forces from freedom from acting in their own common interests. So basically, in a roundabout way, they admit that Western interests are behind all these strange attacks, and hopefully it does not lead to all-out war. We really hope not. Meanwhile, Pepe Escobar has a very detailed article called The Shadow War in Syria. It's a bit complex and technical. I recommend you read the article for yourself, but basically, you've got the NATO forces backing this covert civil war in Syria. You've read past headlines about where they're shipping in Libyan rebels to now be Syrian rebels to oust Assad. Furthermore, Turkey's in on it, and this quote here, the pressure is relentless. Diplomats in Brussels have confirmed to Asia Times Online that the NATO and GCC operatives have set up a command center in Iskenderun and Hatay province in Turkey. Crucial, Aleppo in northwest Syria is very close to the Turkish-Syrian border, and the cover story for this new command center is to engineer humanitarian corridors to Syria. So again, they're carrying out semi-covert war, as they did in Libya. Pepe calls it a 2.0 version in Syria, again, under the humanitarian crisis excuse. And so now, with more on the situation in Syria and really all of the Middle East and Central Asia and geopolitics around the globe, is Pepe Escobar. He's a longtime Asia Times correspondent and a true geopolitical expert. Pepe, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Great pleasure.
So I know we have this Syria article here, but you've been even more focused on the situation in Pakistan. Obviously, tensions have been heating up there with the recent strike that NATO's basically calling accidental. Why don't you highlight the most important things for us?
Well, the most important thing is that NATO and the US, they are burning all the bridges that they have, even with the Pakistani military. They already burnt the bridges with the bulk of the Pakistani population, in fact. This incident less than a week ago was horrible because it was a basic NATO mistake. They have the coordinates of all these checkpoints and police advanced posts in the border, in all the agencies, the 7 agencies in the Pakistani side that border Afghanistan. And if you look at what they are saying in Peshawar, for instance, which they have a very lively Pakistani press in Peshawar, they say that there was no warning. There was an helicopter that came first. They threw flares. Then the gunships came, and they started deliberately killing people one by one, 24 Pakistani soldiers. So how do you explain something like this? It's not a failure of communication. The Pakistani army says, look, we got no warning whatsoever. They knew that this was a Pakistani post. There were no insurgents, let's put it this way, in the area. So what is NATO going to do? Look, the Pakistani response is very, very serious. Monday in Bonn, in Germany, like exactly 10 years after that famous Bonn conference, I'm sure a lot of people will remember, after the so-called end of the Afghan war in 2001, they're going to have a 10th anniversary commemoration meeting of Americans, Europeans, Turks, and guess who's not going to be at the table? The Pakistanis. So you cannot expect the West to come up with a solution for Afghanistan without Pakistan. And even worse, without Iran, because Western Afghanistan, most of what happens is in close contact with Iran. They are Tajiks. It's 4 hours by taxi, let's put it this way, from the Iranian-Afghan border to Mashhad, the big Iranian city to the east. So they're not going to be on the table. What does the U.S. and NATO expect to accomplish in a conference like this? Doesn't make sense.
Well, can you draw out some of the important geopolitical significance with Pakistan? China, of course, saying any attack on Pakistan would be equivalent to attacking China. Obviously, the distribution networks are tied to all the powers in Central Asia. Help us see what's going on here.
Okay. First point is the distribution network that feeds the U.S. and NATO troops in Afghanistan. Pakistan, these last few days, they cut off that. It's a snake full of lorries. Let's put it this way. That goes from Karachi in southern Pakistan to Quetta, and then across the border to southern Afghanistan, to Kandahar especially, and then another snake that goes north to the Khyber Pass and then crosses on the way to Jalalabad and Kabul. So if you see the photographs, they are amazing because you have like hundreds of kilometers of lorries that they are stuck there because they cannot go anywhere, at least for the moment. This is Pakistani retaliation. And there's another distribution network, which is called NDN, the Northern Distribution Network, that goes all across Central Asia. It's very complicated, crosses Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and then gets into northern Afghanistan. But US and NATO are supplied, but less than 20% goes through this route. So if you start antagonizing the Russians, for instance, which gave permission for this route to exist, soon we may come to a situation within the next few weeks or maybe months where all the troops, American and NATO, in Afghanistan, they cannot be supplied anymore because Pakistan is being antagonized and Russia, by a myriad ways, let's put it this way, is also being antagonized. The missile defense controversy, the fact that an invasion, a probable invasion, or even destabilization of Syria, the Russians already said at the UN Security Council, forget about it, we're not going to vote for a resolution. And if you come here, watch out, because we have a naval base in Syria. The Russians have a naval base in the port of Tartus, in the eastern Mediterranean in Syria. And obviously, if anything happens via NATO, with Turkey and with France, and even without the US in the background, as it is at the moment, the first thing they're going to do, they're going to do is buy Russian base in Syria. So the Russians are following this very closely, and they are getting closer and closer with Pakistan, which is something that until, let's say, a year ago, was not even on the cards. And the crux of this rapprochement, let's say, this getting together, is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO. That's a mechanism that it's also 10 years old. Russia, China, and 3 of the Central Asian stands. And we have 4 observers at the SCO, including Iran and Pakistan. And the Russians already said, and they said that for the first time only a few weeks ago, they want Pakistan as a full member. And the Chinese are saying, we also want Iran as a full member. What does that mean in practice? It means that soon in Asia, we're going to have a mechanism that, of course, it's not like NATO because it's not primarily a military alliance, but it's a security mechanism, an economic cooperation mechanism, and soon they're going to develop a military integration as well. So on one side, we're going to have Russia, China, the Central Asians, Pakistan and Iran, for instance, and on the other side, we're going to have NATO. Who can come up with the best solution for Afghanistan? The Afghans themselves are saying, they are observers of the SCO, by the way. The Afghans themselves are saying, look, we need a regional solution with all the internal players on the table in Afghanistan, but with all our neighbors on the table especially. And when you look at it, there's definitely no place for NATO or for Washington in this arrangement.
Yeah. And so obviously the larger question, though, is the World War III scenario. Is it going to happen? Because Syria is on the hit list, Iran's on the hit list, and things are heating up there at the same time this stuff is happening with Pakistan. I mean, what do you really see in the cards here?
Look, I'm not apocalyptic. You know, I may be very pessimistic sometimes when you look at reality, of course. But realistically, what's going on is the Pentagon still wants to implement its doctrine that it's called full spectrum dominance, that it's an official Pentagon doctrine since 2002. So land, air, sea domination, cyberspace domination, and even outer space domination, of course. And Middle East is just a way to get to the big prize, which is Asia. And in fact, a few commentators, like including Michael Clare, for instance, I read his piece, I think 1 or 2 days ago, already talking about what does it mean Obama's Pacific Century or Hillary Clinton's Pacific Century. What does that mean? It means that the U.S. or the Obama administration, because of pressure by the Pentagon generals, they are already launching a new Cold War against China, especially. But don't forget, a war against China can be a war against Russia as well, because the Russian interests are in Central Asia, are in the Caucasus, are in the Mediterranean as well. China's interests are in Africa, some of them in the Middle East, because they import a lot of oil from Saudi Arabia and gas from Iran, and across Asia. So the Pentagon wants to pick a fight simultaneously with Russia and China. I'm not sure this is a very intelligent proposition, to say the least.
Well, if you could also get into some of the most basic facts about your Syrian article, because to me it looks like an all-out covert war. There's a lot of allies and covert things going on. They've just shipped over a lot of the Libyan rebels now in Syria as rebels.
Yes, I think that the most important element, at least for the past few weeks, it's something as few sources confirmed in France, some other sources in Turkey. We confirmed with Brussels. And diplomats in Brussels told us explicitly, yes, there is a control and command center already established in southern Turkey near the Turkish-Syrian border. It's in a place called Iskenderun, it's a very small town, but it's very close to a big city, very important, Antakya, which is the Antioch of biblical times, right? And across the border, like, you know, if you go from the border to Aleppo, for instance, it's half an hour, 40 minutes. Is Aleppo, which is the big city in northern Syria. And it's the largest Syrian city as well. Over 2.5 million people live there. This region, most people are Sunnis, but there are a lot of Kurds living there as well. So what is the strategy? Considering that Russia and China vetoed a UN security resolution authorizing a Libya-style operation against Syria. Considering that the U.S. does